On Main Street, brides-to-be waited months just to book his lens. Daniel Moreau wasn't just a photographer. He was the man families trusted to frame the kiss, the dance, the moment they thought would last forever. His work hung in living rooms, in albums, in the only pictures some couples would ever own. But behind the glossy prints and the practiced smile, something else was developing. It started quiet. A groom gasped for air weeks after his wedding night. A bridesmaid collapsed on her morning run. Then came funerals one after another until whispers spread through town, each coffin linked by a single mark pressed into the corner of every portrait. Moreau photography. What no one knew was that in his desk drawers lay unmarked bottles, and on his laptop was a list of clients, some names circled in red. Behind the camera, each flash wasn't just capturing a memory. It was triggering something far deadlier. This is the story of a community that trusted the wrong lens, and of a light meant to preserve joy that became a silent weapon. Welcome to Justice Uncovered. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the darkness behind the flash is only beginning. Under the cold fluorescent lights of St. Helena Memorial, the corridor pulsed with sound. Sirens outside, stretcher wheels grinding against the tiles, monitors flickering their erratic tones. At 11 p.m., the emergency bay doors opened again. Paramedics shouted over each other as more bodies were rolled in, the fabrics of tuxedos and silk gowns smeared with sweat. A nurse shouted, "Another collapse at the banquet, respiratory distress." The line of gurneys extended down the hall, each figure still dressed in the colors of celebration. Medical records logged identical entries. Eyes bloodshot, breathing uneven, sudden seizures, collapse within minutes of arrival. By 11:30 p.m., 2 victims were declared deceased. A young woman in a strapless ivory gown. A man with a boutonniere still pinned crookedly to his jacket. Their names, handwritten on clipboards, carried the annotation, "Unknown reaction, possible allergen." A doctor leaned over a third victim, pulse weak, epiglottal swelling, his voice clipped for the recorder. He looked up. "Get them on oxygen, now." The ER filled with overlapping sounds, beeping machines, the snap of latex gloves, the hollow metallic clatter of trays being rushed into place. Witness accounts later confirmed the same detail. The smell of burnt plastic and wine mixing in the air, a sharp tang riding above perfume and sweat. A gurney slammed into the wall. Another body convulsed under a white blanket. The monitor flatlined. The room echoed with the steady tone until someone reset the machine. At 12 a.m., law enforcement arrived, noting in their first report the incongruity of the scene. Victims appear to have been attending a formal event. The officer wrote, "Attire suggests wedding reception, collapse simultaneous across multiple individuals." His statement concluded with a single word, unclear. CCTV footage reviewed the following morning provided a fractured sequence of what unfolded inside the banquet hall. At 9:47 p.m., guests clapped as the couple posed near the cake. Champagne glasses clinked, silverware chimed against porcelain plates. At 9:51 p.m., the photographer adjusted his tripod near the dance floor. At 9:52 p.m., the screen flickered with the last flash, an intense white burst that washed out the frame. When the picture returned seconds later, several guests were on the ground, chairs overturned, a glass stem cracked in half on the floor. The lens captured motionless figures among the streamers and rose petals. Then the feed cut out. 3 days later, the city morgue prepared for a service rarely seen. 23 coffins lined the chapel, each draped with white arrangements. Rows of roses sat on top, petals bruised by the weight of the air. At the head of every casket, resting against the wood, was a glossy photograph of the newlyweds smiling, the image bordered in the same style, stamped discreetly with the photographer's studio mark. Family members pressed their hands to the frames, some whispering names, others silent. A priest's microphone squealed before his voice steadied. They came together to celebrate life. They leave us bound in sorrow. The camera in the back of the hall captured a chilling symmetry. Every coffin aligned, every portrait identical in style, the flash of one man's camera reproduced across the row like a chain. The choir's hymn could not mask the soft sobbing at the edges. Reporters were held behind the barricade, but their photographs from outside showed the procession of hearses moving in silence, each window reflecting the same bouquet of white roses. As the final bell tolled and the coffins were lowered, one consistent image remained, the portraits shining faintly in the afternoon sun, every face frozen under the same spectral light. But this was only the beginning. Daniel Moreau's name appeared in nearly every bridal magazine circulated in the county between 2005 and 2015. Public records showed his studio opened in a converted storefront on Main Street, its glass front painted with silver script letters that read Moreau Photography. Over the course of 17 years, he documented more than 200 weddings, each catalogued in invoices, receipts, and framed portraits displayed in private homes. Police interviews conducted later confirmed the depth of that trust. One bride described her living room wall. "The biggest picture in my house is the one he took of us under the arches. Everyone who visits compliments it." Another couple showed investigators an album bound in white leather, Daniel's signature embossed discreetly in the corner. His reputation was reinforced through local coverage. A feature in the community newspaper listed him as Best Wedding Photographer 3 years in a row. Judges for the annual Bridal Expo cited his ability to capture candid intimacy. On file at the Chamber of Commerce were letters of recommendation from florists, caterers, and venue owners who routinely suggested his services. The image of reliability was consistent, a man positioned at the center of nearly every celebration in town. But the documents told another chronology. In 2017, a lawsuit filed in civil court revealed that a lucrative contract with the upscale Harrington Hotel had been awarded to another photographer, despite Daniel's prior agreement. Depositions from that case contained statements accusing him of falling behind the times and failing to deliver innovation. Within weeks, his booking rate fell. A clipping from the city paper carried the headline, "Rising Star Overtakes Moreau in Wedding Market." Personal records showed a downward spiral. Divorce filings from 2019 indicated the end of his marriage. Court documents cited irreconcilable differences. The paperwork signed in a county clerk's office. Surveillance footage from a downtown bar that same year captured him sitting alone at 1 a.m., a row of shot glasses lined on the counter. The timestamp read February 13, 2019, 1:07 a.m. He raised a glass, lowered his head, and the screen cut out. Financial records examined during the later investigation showed debt accumulating steadily. Bank statements logged multiple overdrafts. Collection notices were stapled to his file. One investigator described the documents: credit cards maxed, mortgage in arrears, business loan delinquent. Still, the community regarded him as steady. Couples continued to book, reassured by his lower fees and extensive portfolio. Testimonies described his presence at weddings as calming. A florist remembered, "He always helped move arrangements, even carried boxes for me." A DJ recounted, "He'd joke with the kids, take extra shots for the grandparents." To the public, Daniel remained indispensable, part of the fabric of the event. Yet subtle anomalies threaded through accounts. A fellow photographer told detectives that Daniel frequently wiped his camera lenses with a cloth that carried a sharp, chemical odor. "It wasn't like regular cleaner," she stated, "almost metallic, like something industrial." Clients noted that some sample albums displayed a strange haze, a wash of white across the edges. They had assumed it was an artistic flourish. One bride pointed to her engagement preview. "The glow around us, people said it looked dreamy. Now I'm not so sure." At his studio, assistants described late nights. An employee recalled locking up at 10 p.m. and noticing the glow of flash continuing inside long after. "I could hear the click and see the burst through the curtains," she reported. Another statement confirmed the pattern. He'd stay until 1 or 2 a.m. sometimes alone, testing something. I asked once and he just smiled. CCTV from the building's security system later verified those accounts. Multiple nights showed him inside after midnight, seated behind the camera setup, triggering rapid bursts of light into the empty space. The screen recorded flashes over and over, the reflection bouncing against the glass. On one reel, timestamped March 6, 2021 at 12:42 a.m., he adjusted a large studio lamp, bent close to the lens, and reset the trigger again. Each burst lit the room stark white before vanishing back into black. In the official case file, these recordings marked the first visible signs of the shift. They were cataloged under Exhibit B, After Hours Testing. The images revealed a solitary figure, methodically repeating a ritual no one else witnessed. The audio picked up the faint snap of electrical discharge, then silence, then another flash. The contrast between the cheerful photographs adorning homes across the county and the evidence preserved on grainy surveillance created a fracture that could no longer be dismissed. The man trusted to frame moments of joy was now documented in hours of footage, his face expressionless, surrounded by a storm of artificial light. Each file ended the same way. The last flash filled the screen, and when the glare receded he was still there, bent over the camera, alone in the darkened studio. Purchase records preserved in the investigation traced a series of transactions that began in January 2021. Receipts from Brightview Optical Supply listed multiple replacement flash bulbs, extension cords, and specialized reflectors, quantities far beyond what a single wedding season would require. Credit card statements showed repeat orders from the same vendor every 2 weeks. Surveillance footage from the store confirmed his presence. At 2 p.m. on February 14, 2021, he entered wearing a dark jacket and cap, carrying a notepad. He pointed at the shelf of ultraviolet filters and spoke briefly to the clerk. The clerk's later testimony described the exchange. He asked about wavelength. Most photographers want softer diffusion or color gels. He wanted numbers, nanometers. He kept repeating, "What's the lowest range you carry?" She wrote the details down for the record. Her words were added to the case file under Witness Statement 14B. Deliveries followed. A courier service confirmed multiple drop-offs to Moreau Photography between February and April. Driver logs noted containers without labels. One driver reported, "The bottles weren't marked. Strong metallic smell came through the cardboard. I had to roll down the van window." His statement was corroborated by dispatch records. Inside the studio, evidence recovered during the raid revealed spiral notebooks filled with compact writing. The pages bore test logs, each numbered sequentially. Test on reflective surfaces. Test in crowded hall. Adjust exposure for sustained bursts. The ink was smudged in places, pressure from the pen cutting faint grooves through the paper. Analysts photographed each page, cataloging them into the official evidence archive. Witnesses recalled unusual behavior during ordinary sessions. An assistant remembered Daniel refusing to let others handle the cloths he used on his lenses. He'd clean them himself with this clear liquid. The smell was sharp. I asked once if it was rubbing alcohol. He said nothing. Another assistant described the storage drawers at the back of the studio. Whenever he closed them, I heard the clink of glass like bottles hitting each other. A near incident was documented in April 2021 when a couple collected their engagement proofs. According to their interview, the husband recounted, "We took the book home. My wife looked through the first 10 pages. 10 minutes later, she said her eyes were burning. She had to lie down." The woman was treated at an urgent care clinic. The medical file listed acute photophobia, cause undetermined. The couple later dismissed it as coincidence, but investigators connected the episode months afterward. Metadata analysis of digital files uncovered patterns in his workflow. Logs showed repeated test shots of empty rooms, sometimes hundreds taken in succession. In one sequence from March 2021, the camera fired at fixed intervals, recording identical frames of a blank wall. Each image carried exposure settings pushed beyond recommended safety levels. Technicians flagged the files, exposure anomalies consistent with experimental use of flash equipment. Neighbors offered additional fragments. One said they saw the glow of light seeping through the blinds at 1 a.m. Another told police, "I thought he was doing fashion shoots after hours. The light kept popping every few seconds." A tenant in the same building complained to management about the noise of electrical bursts. Maintenance records confirmed the complaint dated March 8, 2021. During the later forensic sweep, investigators discovered a locked drawer in the studio desk. Inside were two unmarked glass vials, residue dried along the rims. Lab analysis identified traces of a photosensitive compound capable of aerosolization when heated. The report read, "Substance reacts under concentrated light, potentially harmful when dispersed in enclosed spaces." The detail fit with other evidence. Video from a rehearsal dinner on May 6, 2021 showed him adjusting his flash repeatedly, even during speeches. Guests flinched each time, squinting and raising their hands. On audio, one voice muttered, "That's too bright, man." Another added, "Feels like it's burning my eyes." The incident was laughed off but remained embedded in the recording. By June, his purchases had become more specialized. One invoice listed custom capacitors ordered from an electronics supplier. The company representative remembered the call. He said he needed higher storage for quicker bursts. That's not standard for wedding work. The parts were shipped directly to the studio. In a recorded interview with police, a former client recalled a troubling preview session. "He opened the laptop, showed us the slideshow. Halfway through, I felt dizzy. My wife asked him to stop. He smiled, said the program had glitches. We didn't think more about it." They left early, unaware that their discomfort had mirrored symptoms logged by other victims. These scattered accounts, pieced together after the fact, formed the lattice of preparation. Each detail existed at the time, visible but unlinked. The chemical odor, the unmarked containers, the abnormal light bursts, the sudden nausea in bystanders. None of it carried enough weight alone to raise alarm. One final artifact sealed the impression. A CCTV reel from the building lobby at 11 p.m. on April 23, 2021 caught him locking up. He paused, looked back at the door, then stepped outside. As the door shut, the vibration jolted something inside the studio. The camera captured a faint tremor in the window blinds as though glassware had shifted. Later, when investigators replayed the footage, they enhanced the audio. A dull clink echoed, followed by the faint rattle of liquid. The report closed on that moment. A drawer at the rear of the studio, holding its unmarked bottles, quivered in the stillness. The liquid inside shifted, striking against glass. For an instant, the studio seemed to breathe in the dark. Then the blinds fell still, leaving only the echo of that sound behind. The first call came from a cul-de-sac off Linden Drive, a small reception that had emptied by 9 p.m. Phone records showed the groom phoned emergency services at 6:42 a.m. 2 weeks later, his voice caught on the dispatcher's recording. "He can't breathe. My chest is tight. My wife's uncle is on the floor." The apartment camera over the entryway captured the arrival of the ambulance at 6:57 a.m. Paramedics rolled in with a stretcher. The groom, still wearing the thin silicone ring from the ceremony, bent over coughing. Two guests who had stayed overnight lay on the sofa, pale and sweating. The run sheet listed initial assessments: irritated eyes, raspy breath, nausea. Vitals were logged. The groom's oxygen saturation dipped to 89. A paramedic called out, "Mask on, slow deep breaths." The note at the bottom read, "Recent wedding, possible exposure unknown." At St. Helena Memorial, the intake nurse typed the same phrase 3 times, "Reaction unknown." The attending physician dictated for the file at 7:35 a.m. Adult male, mid-30s, acute respiratory distress, non-productive cough, conjunctival injection, no rash, no known food allergy per wife, airway patent, administered nebulizer. The groom blinked rapidly beneath the fluorescent lights. In the next bay, an older man who had danced with the bride at the reception pressed both hands to his chest. A woman with glitter still at the corners of her eyes gagged into a basin. The physician turned to the recorder again. Cluster presentation, all attendees. Onset delayed from event. He underlined delayed on the paper copy. The officiant's phone video of that wedding, pulled later by investigators, showed a modest hall with streamers and a rented speaker system. The camera panned across folding chairs and a small table of roses. At 7:12 p.m., the footage showed the photographer stepping backward to frame the cake cutting. The click and flash punctuated the laughter. At 7:19 p.m., he directed a group portrait near a mirrored wall. The flash bounced off the glass with a hard white bloom. People squinted, then laughed and rubbed their eyelids. The video ended on the couple swaying under ceiling lights that hummed with a faint electrical buzz. 3 admissions from that circle occurred within 24 hours. The charting nurse stamped each paper strip with the same code: dyspnea, conjunctivitis, dizziness. The discharge summary 2 days later listed the groom stable. The older guest kept overnight for observation. No allergen was identified. Samples were sent for standard panels. Nothing flagged. The physician signed the line, reaction unknown, and moved to the next file. The second case opened on a Thursday. A bridal party from a vineyard 30 miles north walked into urgent care one by one. The clinic's surveillance camera watched them arrive across a span of 2 hours, a bridesmaid shielding her eyes with a scarf, the mother of the bride held by her sister at the elbow, the DJ from the reception now without his hat, shoulders hunched. Triage recorded burning eyes and pressure at temples. 6 patients total, each checking a box on the intake form next to headache, photophobia, shortness of breath. "When did it start?" the nurse asked. "Monday," said one. "I thought it was a migraine." The doctor examined pupils with a penlight and wrote in the record, "Abnormal sensitivity to light, viral panel pending, unclear etiology." The vineyard's event manager handed over security footage. At 8:03 p.m. on the night of the celebration, the photographer asked for the lights to be dimmed and placed a tripod at the center of the room. The video tracked the sequence. A burst of flash, a sea of faces turned toward it, reflective vases casting pricks of white onto napkins and glassware. In the audio, someone said, "Whoa, that's bright." Another voice laughed, "He's trying to make us look flawless." The camera kept rolling. The feed captured nothing catastrophic, only the ordinary motions of a party. By the end of week 2, hospital reports had logged 4 cases connected to wedding events. The patients arrived from separate neighborhoods and different venues. The only common line in the interview notes was that a formal portrait had been taken. The ER chief pinned the summary to a corkboard. 4 admissions, ages 24 to 63, symptoms overlapping, onset staggered, reaction unknown. Week 3 edged the numbers upward. 11 cases, 7 from 2 new receptions and 4 follow-ups from the earlier clusters. The spreadsheet built by the hospital epidemiology nurse displayed the entries in gray and red. Names across the left column, dates of attendance, dates of onset, symptoms, discharge, or admit. On Thursday, one of the early patients returned with persistent cough and was admitted for observations. The staff physician dictated into the mobile recorder, "Non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema suspected. Exposures reviewed with patient. No new leads." He clicked the device off and stood before the board in silence, reading the venue addresses aloud as if the repetition could make a pattern appear. Inside a cramped office, a resident arranged a row of wedding photographs on her desk. The families had provided them for sick relatives who wanted to see the images while confined to their beds. The resident compared edges, highlights, the way the light cut the silhouette of a shoulder, or the spine of a wine glass. She noticed a recurring smear at the margin of several prints, a chalky white flare that seemed to lick the corner of the frame. She called the senior. "It's the light," she said. He leaned in on the signature line. Each print bore a small embossed mark, the studio's name in thin lettering barely visible unless angled toward the desk lamp. By week 4, 17 patients had crossed the threshold. 4 funerals were scheduled before the week closed. The mortuary log, printed in narrow type, listed the cause of death as respiratory failure, contributing conditions under investigation. 2 of the 4 had appeared in social media posts smiling on a dance floor 3 weeks earlier. Family members clipped the images and set them beside the memorial guest book. In the photos, the highlights from the overhead lights looked smeared, as though a translucent veil had been thrown over the lens. The autopsy room recorded the routine rhythms of stainless steel and paper. The air held an antiseptic sting. Preliminary notes were dictated in short sentences. No food allergen detected. Toxicology screening incomplete. The lungs carried a faint chemical odor when opened, a detail the examiner added quietly to the microphone. He paused, then continued. Fibrotic changes atypical for age. Correlate with environmental exposure. He placed the recorder down and reached for the next folder. Families who had hired the same photographer began to compare their albums. They met at kitchen tables under pendant lights, photographs spread out, fingerprints gathering at the corners of glossy pages. A mother turned one print toward the light and saw the flare along the rim of a champagne flute. "That wasn't there on the screen," she said, voice captured on a phone recording later shared with investigators. Across town, 2 bridesmaids recounted identical eye irritation after viewing their digital slideshow at a studio visit the week before symptoms began. "He clicked through so fast. The room felt hot," one said. "My eyes burned," said the other. "I had to step outside." In epidemiology, nurse created a map with red pins for each case. The clusters formed around banquet halls, wineries, and church basements. She added a small sticker beside venues that had hosted the same vendor list. A caterer confirmed dates, a florist faxed invoices. When the list of photographers was compiled, a name repeated. The nurse lifted the phone and dialed the ER chief. "We have a common service provider," she said. "Same studio across multiple events." The chief asked a simple question. "Is it the food?" The answer came back negative. Caterers varied. Wines varied, venues varied. One constant remained in the columns, a studio credit. At 3 p.m. on a Friday, a physician taped printouts to the whiteboard in the staff room. He placed side by side 8 photographs from different weddings. The same spectral light flared on the edges of the frames, reflected in glassware, caught in the sheen of satin and the curve of an eye. He pointed to the corner embossing that marked each print. The room stayed quiet. Finally, he clicked a marker and wrote a single line under the tally of cases. All patients were photographed by the same man. By the start of summer, local headlines carried the same phrase in bold type. "Mysterious illness at weddings." Evening broadcasts showed footage of ambulances parked outside banquet halls, stretchers disappearing into sliding doors, mourners gathered in black at cemeteries. Anchors repeated the question. Why are guests collapsing weeks after celebrations? Clips rolled of couples smiling beneath flower arches, followed by hospital monitors beeping in dim rooms. The contrast unsettled viewers. Community bulletin boards filled with posts. Cancel your photographer. Don't go to large receptions. Avoid the halls on the west side. Rumors spread of toxins in the catering, of tainted champagne, of viruses that spread in clusters. Couples preparing to marry hesitated. Venues reported cancellations. DJs saw bookings fall. Yet Daniel Moreau continued to receive contracts. Lower rates drew clients in. Police later summarized in an internal memo. Despite widespread fear, subject retained steady workflow due to affordability. Hospitals kept recording cases. Week 5, 5 new patients. Week 6, 9 more. The running total reached 31. Autopsies confirmed organ inflammation but offered no unifying cause. Death certificates left the line blank, recorded as under investigation. Families pressed photos of their weddings to investigators, hoping for answers. Each album displayed the same style, the same blinding highlight frozen on crystal glass or rose petals. A special unit was tasked with forensic review. Detectives collected digital files from grieving families and imported them into analysis software. Metadata revealed something anomalous. The EXIF data embedded in dozens of files showed flash settings beyond consumer norms. While standard flashes pulsed between 1/64 and 1/128 second, Daniels registered consistent use of extended burst modes. The logs also carried entries under frequency not recognized by the software. A technician presented his findings to the unit commander. His files show cycles, repetitive, deliberate, not accidental. The report was logged under Technical Brief 22F. Investigators built side-by-side comparisons. Photographs from other wedding photographers in the same venues showed warm hues, natural shadows. Daniel's files displayed stark whites that burned into corners, leaving ghost-like streaks across reflective surfaces. In every reception, white roses set in vases on the tables caught the light with abnormal intensity. When magnified, the petals flared with unnatural halos. Analysts circled the details in red and attached them to the board. Symbolic objects once used to honor purity now reflected the light that preceded collapse. The press caught fragments through leaks. A columnist wrote, "Experts say certain flashes may have caused unusual sensitivity." Public panic deepened. Couples requested refunds. Parents phoned hospitals demanding testing before allowing daughters to walk down aisles. Still, Moreau Photography accepted new appointments. His studio calendar, retrieved later, listed bookings marked in neat handwriting. Friday, church basement. Saturday, vineyard. Sunday, ballroom. Search warrants granted by the district court allowed seizure of his electronic devices. On a gray morning, detectives entered the studio at 7 a.m. The footage from their body cameras documented shelves lined with boxed bulbs, cords coiled in plastic, drawers locked. The laptop on his desk was lifted, tagged, and sent to the digital lab. Its hard drive contained folders labeled with initials and dates. Amid the files, investigators found a document simply titled Clients. The spreadsheet listed names, venues, and dates in 2 columns. Some names were highlighted in red. Cross-referencing with hospital data yielded a revelation. Every family marked in red had reported illness or death following their event. The match was exact. The detective sergeant wrote in his report, "Correlation 100%. Red-marked clients equals confirmed patient clusters." He read the line aloud in the operations room. The room fell into silence. Officers reviewed security camera recordings from the studio to corroborate. One tape from June 4, 12 a.m. showed Daniel seated at his desk, typing on the same laptop. He highlighted a row on the spreadsheet and pressed save. He closed the file and wiped the screen with a cloth. The overhead light flickered against the glass jars stacked on the shelf behind him. Families who had yet to wed began to call the precinct. Recordings captured voices tense with fear. "We booked him last month. What should we do?" The officers advised caution, but without a public charge, no official warning could be issued. The uncertainty spread faster than the news itself. Florists reported nervous brides, bakers canceled deliveries, halls stood half empty. Inside the precinct evidence room, technicians continued parsing the digital archive. Audio recovered from one wedding showed a faint hum between bursts of applause. Spectrographic analysis suggested interference from light cycling at non-standard frequencies. The report concluded, exposure consistent with subject's modified equipment. Investigators pinned another sheet to the board, this one showing photographs of the same bouquet of roses under different conditions. In each of Daniel's photos, the petals glowed as if painted with phosphorescent ink. Public meetings reflected the rising panic. At a town hall recorded on June 15, a father stood and shouted, "We trusted him to capture our children's weddings. Now our families are burying them." Applause and cries filled the room, the video ending on the gavel of a council member calling order. The digital unit finished its cross-check against the spreadsheet. Names highlighted in red accounted for 31 confirmed patients, with 4 deaths. Names in black had events scheduled in the coming weeks. On June 22, analysts compiled a list of pending weddings. One date stood out: a Saturday banquet with more than 200 guests. The file showed the couple's initials circled in red. The operations captain read the entry aloud during briefing at 8 a.m. "This event is in 6 days. Same photographer, same mark." The room stayed silent for several seconds. Detectives exchanged glances. One officer closed his notebook and muttered under his breath, "We're out of time." The case log closed that day with a final line added in block letters: "Upcoming client identified. Event scheduled next week." Spreadsheet shows red highlight. The evidence board, once cluttered with scattered notes, now displayed a single pattern: undeniable and urgent. In the corner, a printed photo of the couple set to marry next week stared back at the officers, smiles frozen in anticipation. Their names sat beneath a red mark, the same red that had already foretold collapse. Unmarked surveillance vans rotated shifts outside Moreau photography beginning June 23. Detectives parked down the block captured the comings and goings of clients, while technicians monitored interior audio from hidden microphones planted during the warrant execution days earlier. At 9 p.m., the feed picked up the first burst of light. A pop of electrical discharge, then another, then a rapid series that clipped the microphones into static. A detective wrote in his log, "Subject testing flash continuously after hours." The cadence repeated for 20 minutes before falling silent. Then the faint scrape of glass against metal followed, a drawer opening, bottles clinking. Inside the studio, clients continued to arrive as scheduled. On June 24 at 2 p.m., a bride-to-be and her fiancé sat for portraits. The hidden recorder captured his voice instructing them to hold still, then the sound of the shutter and flash. The woman later told investigators, "I was standing maybe 2 feet away. The light hit me and it felt like a needle in my head. My ears rang, my eyes blurred." Her fiancé confirmed her statement. He described guiding her to a chair where she pressed her palms against her temples. The following day, another session ended abruptly when a client collapsed. At 3:17 p.m., the audio picked up the thud of a body hitting the floor. The assistant shouted, "Call 911." The studio's own security camera recorded Daniel lowering his camera, expression fixed, while others rushed to help the woman sprawled near the backdrop. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes. Sirens recorded on neighborhood CCTV as they parked outside. The run sheet listed faint pulse, shallow breathing, pupils unresponsive to light. She was transported to St. Helena Memorial under Code 3. The incident was documented in hospital records as sudden unexplained syncope during photo session. In the aftermath, detectives replayed the video frame by frame. On screen, Daniel lifted a cloth to wipe the lens, the rag saturated from a small glass bottle. The bottle bore no label. Under magnification, investigators noted the adhesive residue of a label that had been scraped away. He twisted the cap, applied liquid, and rubbed the lens before snapping the next shot. Forensic technicians flagged the clip. One wrote in the report, "Bottle with obliterated label, handled repeatedly during sessions. Strong indication of chemical involvement." The pattern accelerated. Audio from June 26 contained a string of flash bursts lasting nearly an hour. Technicians monitoring live wrote in the log at 11:04 p.m. "Subject alone. Sustained firing sequence. Possible calibration for high-output exposure." The sound of furniture scraping echoed faintly, followed by the clatter of metal stands. Analysts concluded he was adjusting tripods in preparation for larger arrays. Witnesses outside confirmed unusual behavior. A florist from the adjoining shop told officers he dragged in crates after midnight, looked heavy like equipment. A tenant upstairs reported vibrations shaking light fixtures. It was like thunder every few seconds, she said. I thought a transformer was blowing. By June 27, the pressure inside the task force room escalated. Investigators displayed a still from the studio's own camera showing Daniel positioning 3 flashes at different angles. On the desk beside him sat the unmarked bottle. A detective pointed at the enlarged image. That's our delivery mechanism. The commander nodded, then shifted the discussion to the upcoming weekend. The red highlighted wedding on the spreadsheet loomed 3 days away. The studio remained under watch. On June 28 at 6 p.m., the hidden microphone caught conversation with another couple. They laughed nervously as he adjusted the lights. Seconds later came the burst. In the background, the woman's voice tightened. It's too strong. Then the scrape of a chair as she sat quickly. Her fiancé said, "You okay?" She whispered, "My eyes, it feels like it's stabbing through." The microphone captured Daniel's reply. One more shot. Detectives monitoring the line exchanged looks. They noted the exchange verbatim in the report. That night, technicians scrolled through the hard drive image seized earlier. Among the folders of client names sat a new file created just 2 days prior. It contained schematics for a remote trigger system. The diagram showed wiring to synchronize multiple flashes simultaneously. A forensic specialist typed in her summary, "Design indicates capacity to fire array without manual presence." The evidence pointed to escalation toward automated use in large venues. At 10:11 p.m. on June 29, building CCTV outside a convention hall recorded Daniel unloading equipment cases from his van. The timestamp placed him inside for nearly 40 minutes. When maintenance staff later opened the doors, they found a tripod positioned near the back wall, covered by a dust sheet. Security footage from inside, though grainy, showed him kneeling to attach cables, then sliding a compact device onto the mount. He stood, tested a burst, and the camera lens flared into white for a split second. Then he packed his bag and left through a side door. The hall's manager reported the discovery to police after noticing the equipment remained the next morning. Detectives compared the tripod to those visible in Daniel's studio recordings. The match was exact, down to scratches on the leg clamps. They marked the event in the case log. Subject planting automated camera system at large venue. Scheduled reception July 1. Estimated guests 200 plus. In the evidence room, the task force pinned the final still from the hall's security feed. Daniel's silhouette bent over the tripod, wires trailing across the polished floor, the white burst frozen in the lens. Underneath, a printed copy of the red highlighted spreadsheet entry displayed the names of the couple due to marry that weekend. The net had tightened, the recordings were irrefutable, and yet the event remained on schedule. The task force board ended June 29 with a single entry circled in black marker. Subject installed auto trigger camera for full hall portrait. The image lingered under the fluorescent light of the operations room, an empty banquet hall, a tripod standing alone in the shadows, waiting for its signal. Rain slicked the granite steps of the Harrington Grand, while valets jogged past with umbrellas and headlights feathered the puddles into ribbons of white. Inside the ballroom, cameras perched like insects along the balcony rail. By 6 p.m., more than 300 guests had checked in, the registry tablet capturing a steady stream of names, the background hum of strings and silverware threaded into the hall. White roses clustered in cylinders down every table, petals edged with a faint glossy sheen under dimmed chandeliers. Plainclothes officers filtered through service doors and settled in prearranged positions. 2 sat at the far bar. One held a coat near the vestibule to hide his lapel mic. Others paced the mezzanine, touching their earpieces only once to confirm. In the loading corridor, a technician rolled a black case marked with evidence tape to the staging area and locked it. Body cameras blinked red in stealth mode. At 6:40 p.m., the operations captain keyed his radio. All units green. The line hissed, then quieted. Daniel Moreau arrived from the rain carrying 2 tripod cases and a rolling trunk. Security footage showed him moving with unhurried precision, badge scanned, doors opening ahead of him. He stowed the trunk behind a drape near the stage and began to build the lattice of light. Hosts watched him work, nodding. 10 minutes, he said. Voice picked up on a boom mic suspended above the dance floor. He placed one flash at the head table, another near the balcony stairs, a third on the mezzanine rail stabilizer, each set to face inward so the beams would cross at the center. When he angled the last light, the roses nearest the lens burned briefly to paper white, then cooled. The bridal party entered to applause at 7:12 p.m. Guests raised phones, the room dotted with small screens, a second constellation beneath the chandeliers. A detective standing near the photo booth pressed record on a disguised handheld. The live feed carried back to the surveillance truck through the service lot. On the monitor, Daniel rotated through the array, checking connections, reaching for a cloth and a small glass bottle kept near his lens. He twisted the cap, dampened the cloth, and wiped once, twice. A tech in the van froze the frame and typed a caption. Bottle with scraped label, recurrent. At 7:28 p.m., he asked for the house lights to dim to 70% and tested a burst. A hard white bloom washed the walls and the balcony rail, spidering through the crystal on table centerpieces. On the mezzanine, an officer squinted and blinked his eyes clear. In audio, a guest near the head table laughed, then said soft enough for the mic to catch, "That's strong." Another voice said, "He'll do a group shot later." Precisely at 8 p.m., a floor manager approached a handheld mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, gather for the panoramic portrait." Staff swung the doors closed to seal the hall. Hush spread as the band muted their instruments. Daniel climbed a short ladder clutching a remote trigger. He steadied it on the railing and lifted his other hand. "On 3, he said. He did not reach 3. A flash detonated, then a second, then a carried surge across the array that turned the hall to winter white. Video frames clipped into overexposure, then recovered in a flicker. When color returned, the camera at the rear bar captured a thin wave moving through the crowd. Hands to ears, then temples, then mouths. A bridesmaid whispered, "My head," and bent. On the main floor, a man swayed, knocked into a chair, and caught himself. 2 guests knelt, palms pressed to eye sockets. The roses flared again and held the light like salt. The operations captain spoke into the radio. Now. Teams moved. Uniforms poured in from side doors and service passages. Voices sharp and controlled. "Police, keep your hands where we can see them." The DJ killed the sound. The room filled with breathing and the soft knock of heels as people adjusted their weight. Daniel held the trigger loose at his side, then lowered it to the ladder step. Officers reached him on the platform and pivoted him down in a practice sequence, wrists restrained. A body camera caught the close-up of his hands as cuffed, fingers marked by smears of the same clear fluid that had wet the lens cloth. The cuffs clicked shut at 8:03 p.m. Paramedics entered with kits. A medic bent over a woman seated on the floor. "Stay with me," he said. "Focus here." He waved 2 fingers, watched her pupils struggle to track. Oxygen hissed. Another medic checked a man at the bar who clutched his temples and gagged into a napkin. Vitals were taken on a flurry of paper stickers. Dizziness, nausea, photophobia were written across 3 triage tags. Detectives moved straight for the gear. Gloves snapped. One officer twisted the cap from the unmarked bottle and sniffed from a safe distance, then capped it again and sealed it in a labeled bag. Another bagged the cloths, cords, and spare bulbs. A third removed the trigger device, revealing a modified circuit consistent with the schematics seized from his laptop. Evidence markers rose like small yellow roofs on the parquet floor. A camera clicked fast, documenting each angle, bottle, cloth, reflector, array. Guests murmured in clusters. "Is it safe?" A man asked, voice captured on a boom. A woman in sequins gripped a chair back and whispered, "My ears won't stop ringing." The bride's mother stood with her palms on the table, red-rimmed eyes turned away from the roses. In the surveillance truck, a technician reviewed the live feed and cued the last minute for instant replay. The burst sequence showed 3 flashes firing in staggered rhythm and a thin bloom expanding through the air near the head table, barely visible unless slowed. He rolled the footage again and pointed. "There," he said to the commander, "aerosolized layer at ignition." At 8:19 p.m., Daniel's trunk was opened under camera. Inside, investigators found 2 small vials taped to the interior lid, cotton packed around them to prevent fracture. Both were unlabeled. One was half empty. They photographed the positions before removal. Under the foam, a notebook lay flat. The first page held booking dates. Midway through, the script changed. Test logs appeared with bullets and check marks. Burst 30 seconds. Reflective glass good. Lower ambient better flare. Near the back, a line spread across the page like a ledger. Tests 110, weddings. Test 11, stadium. The sergeant read it once, then set it open for the evidence camera to record. The air in the trunk held a faint metallic tang that clung to the latex gloves. A hazardous materials team arrived at 8:26 p.m. and moved in with portable air sensors. They placed a sampling hood near the head table and another by the mezzanine flash. Readouts hummed, numbers stabilizing. The supervisor spoke into his shoulder mic. "Trace levels present. Ventilate." Staff cracked the service doors. The band stood silent behind their instruments, eyes reflecting the police lights outside. Guests were escorted in small groups to the foyer for evaluation. In the corridor, an officer took statements. "What did you feel?" he asked. "Pressure in my eyes," one man said. "A heat under my skin," said another. "Like the light went through me." None used the word poison. Several touched their temples again and asked for water. Medics warned the group that symptoms could progress over hours or days. Contact numbers were collected for follow-up. In a secure room off the loading dock, detectives seated Daniel at a metal table. The body camera on the lead investigator captured the inventory laid out between them. A sealed bottle in a plastic bag, the notebook folded to the page headed with Test 11, the remote trigger. The investigator said only, "For the record, these items were recovered from your equipment tonight." The camera framed his hands as the evidence technician labeled the bags and signed the chain of custody line. The forensic lab delivered a preliminary finding just after 10 p.m. A field chemist holding a tablet stepped into the operations room and read from the screen. "Compound is phototoxic, volatile when warmed. Under focused light, converts to vaporized irritant affecting mucous membranes and neural tissue. Likely mechanism, heated residue on lens or reflectors atomized at flash ignition." He looked up from the report. "It rides the light, then the air." The note was added to the case file under interim conclusion. Officers swept the balcony and located a small remote tied to a support beam with gaffer tape. It linked to a hidden receiver at the base of the mezzanine flash, matching the diagram recovered from his laptop. When triggered, all 3 flashes could fire without a hand on any camera. The recorded range test in the notebook had been accurate. The system would have worked from the far corner of the hall or from a service corridor. Short, stunned phrases accumulated on the audio log. "We trusted him," someone whispered. "He's done hundreds of weddings," another voice said flatly. The ballroom lights rose to full. The roses no longer glowed. They sat dull under the neutral wash, water trembling inside their vases each time a stretcher wheel clicked over the threshold. At 11 p.m., officers walked Daniel through the service corridor, past stacked chairs and a mop bucket that creaked on a wheel. Rain tapped the dock. A flash from a news camera popped against the loading bay roof and scattered into drops. He was placed in the back of a cruiser. The trunk locked shut on his equipment. The ballroom doors remained open as fans whirred to clear the air. The band packed silently. Back at the precinct, evidence was arrayed on a stainless table for cataloging. The notebook lay open beneath a ring lamp. An officer traced the inked line with a gloved finger for the camera. Tests 110, weddings. Test 11, stadium. The word stadium sat alone on the page. During the custodial search, an officer patted the inside pocket of Daniel's raincoat and withdrew a folded slip of cardstock. He opened it to the lens of the body camera. It was a concert ticket for the following Saturday, evening start time, location listed as the Municipal Arena uptown. The camera held on the print as the officer read the date aloud. The paper reflected the overhead light like a small mirror, bright and hard and white. Yellow tape stretched across the glass of Moreau photography, its reflection trembling each time a car passed on Main Street. The blinds inside were drawn, but through narrow gaps the outlines of tripods and backdrops remained visible like skeletons of a craft now frozen. A sheriff's notice taped to the door read in block letters, "Sealed under investigation." Rain streaked down the window, distorting the view of the sealed interior. Pedestrians paused briefly, staring before moving on. No flowers were left at the doorstep. The community's response registered in numbers. Contracts for wedding photographers plummeted. In the county clerk's office, licensing applications fell by half within 3 months. Venues reported couples declining to hire professional shooters, opting instead for disposable cameras and phone snapshots. A caterer told local news, "People are scared. They think the light itself is cursed." A DJ at a reception hall confirmed, "I've seen brides ask guests not to bring flashes at all." The Trade Association for Photographers released a statement urging calm, but bookings dropped steadily. Families who had already hired Daniel canceled upcoming sessions. Police reports logged dozens of requests to surrender deposits in exchange for voided contracts. One bride wrote in her complaint, "We cannot walk down the aisle with that name attached to us." A planner confirmed, "Photographers are being treated like contagion. Entire portfolios have become suspect." At St. Helena Memorial, records continue to fill with follow-ups. Survivors from earlier receptions arrived with chronic migraines and blurred vision. Doctors charted post-exposure neurological symptoms linked to prior event photography. The link was never disputed. The association between weddings and illness had hardened beyond reversal. On July 22, the City Council authorized a memorial in the central square. Construction crews installed steel stands, each holding an enlarged photograph. But the images were not clear. Each print had been deliberately processed to mimic the flare found in Daniel's files, white streaks devouring the faces of smiling couples until they faded to blanks. Families brought candles and placed them at the bases of the stands. Children traced the outlines of the blurred figures with their fingers, asking names that parents whispered in return. Reporters filmed the unveiling. The broadcast captured the silence when the first sheet was lifted to reveal a bride and groom erased by light. By August, the phrase had entered language. Guests no longer said "smile for the camera," they said "careful of the flash." The reversal was complete. Where once light had been used to preserve memory, now it marked danger. A florist summed it in one sentence, quoted in a television interview. "Light used to mean joy, now it means mourning." At the courthouse evidence room, Daniel's equipment remained sealed. Photographers brought in for expert testimony stood behind glass and identified the modified arrays. "Standard bodies," one said, "but wired for synchronization." The unmarked bottles sat in separate lockers, each labeled hazard, phototoxic. The notebook lay flat in a vault, spine broken to the page that read Test 11, Stadium. A year later, the Harrington Grand reopened its ballroom. The manager noted during interviews that couples requested no group portraits. "They want music, food, dancing," he said. "No flash, not even for cake." Staff dimmed chandeliers lower than before, and roses were replaced by lilies. On September 1, the square filled again. Dozens of families attended the dedication of the permanent memorial. The structure rose in brushed steel with a screen looping images in grayscale. Each frame ended in a wash of white, faces dissolving into void. The inscription at the base, chosen by vote, reads simply, "We trusted the lens." Television cameras recorded the detail. Rows of empty chairs were placed before the screen, symbolizing receptions cut short. One chair stood apart, covered in black fabric. On it rested a single camera, lens capped, body draped in cloth. A wind gust fluttered the veil, shifting just enough to reveal the outline of glass beneath. The feed carried the image live, the commentator speaking low. A bride's chair left unfilled, a groom's seat beside it vacant. Before them, the covered camera that will never fire again. The crowd stood in silence as the loop continued, images brightening until they collapsed into pure white. The camera under its cloth reflected the afternoon sun in a dull gleam, the final object in a tableau that closed the record. The wedding chair remained empty, its partner beside it untouched, the instrument of memory turned into an artifact of fear.